The fact is, climate change is an issue which is caused not by countries like India, but the rest of the world. If EU decides to go ahead with CBAM, India should impose a tax on the European Union for the inaction that Europe has done on climate change.
Welcome to this episode of Sustainability Karma. I'm your host, Rajiv Tikoo. Today, we have a very eminent guest with us, Sunita Narain. She's Director General of Center for Science and Environment. She's probably one of the most influential Indian voices on environment globally. Welcome, Sunita Narain, to this episode of Sustainability Karma.
Thank you, Rajiv. I'm also delighted to be with you.
So what would be your agenda for the new government?
It's always a good time to rethink and to re-energize the plans moving forward. Now, from our perspective, it is very clear that there are two or three issues that need to be kept in mind as we move ahead. Number one, the biggest agenda for the new government is really the agenda, the unfinished business of yesterday. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that that is top on the agenda still. It's very clear we need to provide clean air to most of us in our cities. It is a fundamental right. The governments have done a lot over the last few years to try and bring down pollution, but it isn't going far enough. So that's an agenda that has to be top on the agenda. The biggest issue has to be the issue of water, the issue of wastewater, the issue of our rivers. It is very clear that till now, all the work that governments have done, we have not succeeded because we haven't thought through enough on the method of treating wastewater in a poorer country like India. The paradigm shift that we need to make so that our cities can have water, clean water, but don't return to it wastewater to our rivers and kill our rivers. The third big agenda, of course, is the agenda of food. We talked about, the Honorable Prime Minister talked about doubling farmers' income. It's a work in progress. But what is very clear today is that doubling income cannot come at the cost of environment, cannot come at the cost of higher inputs to farmers, which throws them into a debt trap. Therefore, the whole question about how do we do agriculture, which is biodiverse, which is nutritious, which is good for farmers, that has to be on the agenda. The difference, Rajiv, is that this agenda has to be done in the time of climate change. We are definitely seeing the impact of climate change. It is taking away the development dividend. Government invest in putting water, schools, infrastructure. One flood, one drought destroys the ability of people to cope. So it is very clear that whatever agenda, development agenda, has to be put within the context of climate change. The agenda for the new government has to be the strengthening of institutions. It is very clear we cannot do development without the institutions of accountability, without the institutions of governance. And that has to be done in a new age way, because it is also very clear that the institutions of the past have become institutions which have become more in transactional cost, difficult to manage. We need to think of a new way to move ahead.
What could be the paradigm shift you're talking about?
So the paradigm shift, Rajiv, is not rocket science. The paradigm shift is to see government programs through. Okay. I mean, what is very clear is that there is an intention in government. I have no doubt about the intention of government to do the programs that I have talked about. Where we have lacked is the ability to deliver on many of the programs. And we have also lacked is the imagination to do things differently. Now, imagination also comes from an ability to understand different points of view. See, none of us have the wisdom, but we have wisdom which is common wisdom. And learning from the ground allows government to be able to get smarter and smarter in its delivery systems. So in my view, Rajiv, government's intentions are there. We clearly have the programs, we have the schemes. What we now need is to infuse new energy and new imagination as we move ahead.
So what about resources? We always seem to be talking about finances and technology. So what about those two important factors?
So I think the government of India has done an amazing job in putting forward money where it is needed, whether it is Manrega, whether it is the drinking water program, whether it is the food program. There is money that has been put forward. And I think that has come at the cost of India. And it's an issue that needs to be raised because at the end of the day, let's also be clear, there is a challenge of managing this from a global perspective. The fact is, climate change is an issue which is caused not by countries like India, but the rest of the world. Now, this is where the government of India's ability to be able to demand more resources from the rest of the world must be important, because we need to be able to put the fact that we are suffering losses, we are suffering a damage because of climate change. The other part of the financial question is that we do have money, but we need to make sure we use the money very smartly. And I think that's where the issue of how you spend the money is important. Today, we are doing development in a way that it adds to the crisis of climate change. We are building in the Himalayas in a way that it makes the Himalayan region even more vulnerable. Now, that is making sure that the public infrastructure and the financing we put in is actually getting lost. And in this time when money is scarce, I think it's going to be even more important to make sure that our planning is good, the execution is time bound, and that we actually make sure that we can mitigate the losses that we foresee will happen because of the execution that we do. So I think smarter, sharper planning and execution is the need of the hour.
Last year, India was also able to push forward the interests of developing countries because of its presidency of G20. Now, do you see any such kind of a platform really apart from COP29 where India can really again advance the agenda of the developing countries further?
So, this is about all platforms. There are many platforms, and we don't have to be the president of a platform to lead the agenda. We lead the agenda through our moral force. We lead the agenda through the practice that we can bring to the table, to the difference approach that we can bring to the table. We can lead the agenda, and I believe India is doing things differently which need to be showcased to the world. We can lead the agenda in COP, on the climate conference. We can lead the agenda in plastics. Big forum, big negotiation is happening on the plastic treaty today. It's an issue in which India can take a huge leadership because we have so much new thinking in India, so that we do not want waste to be waste. We can lead the agenda on the issue of water, the issue of health. So I think India is in very good position to lead global agenda. But we must understand that the global agenda can be led only when we have both the moral force as well as a force of someone who is driving the agenda at home and therefore can stand behind the ideas that we are putting forward to the rest of the world. That's what the world is looking for. They are desperately looking for leaders who can stand behind their vision.
At the same time, Indian industry is facing challenges from Europe, for example, because of carbon border tax. So how do we really have a level playing field and not suffer because of these barriers?
In fact, this is something on which we are just publishing a new paper, and we have done an analysis on this. Essentially, our argument is that the carbon border tax, which is being imposed by EU, is completely wrong because it is about equity on the global scale, where EU was to reduce its emissions, and you cannot put the cost of emission control on poor countries, India or Africa. But that said, we have also presented what can be done. Because if EU decides to go ahead with CBAM, we are also saying that India should impose a tax on the European Union for the inaction that Europe has done on climate change. Because over the years, if you look at the emissions of Europe, they have still contributed to the stock of greenhouse gases. They haven't done the reductions as deeply as they should have. And they have also depended on offsets as well as buying emissions from other parts of the world. So we are saying, one, India should impose a tax on EU, on the goods that we import from EU. Secondly, we're saying that if there is a tax that EU puts on our goods, we should not pay the tax to the European Union, however, collect it at the point of when it leaves India, so that the Indian government has the control of the tax, and it should invest the money in improving environmental controls in Indian industry. So we should not be paying our tax to Europe. And if indeed our question also to Europe is, if they're collecting tax, they should return that tax, because we have to make sure that we improve our industry as well as our trajectory of pollution control.
And what's your sense of India Inc.'s preparation on whether it is CBAM or overall emission reduction or ESG? What's your understanding?
So, Rajiv, that's too broad a question, but my understanding is that Indian industry, especially the large players, are beginning to walk the talk. And they want to be seen as players, and they are doing as much as they can within their resources to reduce pollution and to find innovative ways to be able to cut costs, but also reduce pollution. So I have no doubt that they are trying. But I think given the challenge in the world today, it's no longer about walking the talk, but running the talk. And I think a lot of it also, Rajiv, is about the government of India's own regulatory systems being weak. We have a EPR for plastic, but it is so weak that we don't really know how much plastic is produced. So the companies get away. We have an excellent system of being able to track for companies to track their compliance and their systems of water reduction, energy reduction. But again, we are not giving enough focus on it. So again, going back to my agenda, strengthen regulatory institutions so that Indian industry also has more heft to do better.
So in that background, do you see a bigger role for Indian civil society also to hold companies accountable?
So, Rajiv, that will depend very much on the mood of the government and mood of the nation as we move ahead, because Indian civil society, I think, has played a very good role. I think more than that, it's been it's the question of not in my backyard, okay? It's not about me. It's about local communities saying, not in my backyard should there be pollution, not in my backyard should there be mining. Now, if we see those voices as being obstructionist, as being anti-development, then those voices get stifled. But if we see those voices as being a legitimate part of improving decision-making as we move ahead, then those voices get part of the tapestry of development. Then they become partners in development because they can help us to improve the way we move ahead. So I think, Rajiv, this is really about the narrative of building. And to me, when I talked about the institutional agenda, my biggest hope is that in the government that comes now, the old government, the new government that comes, is the institutional agenda of participatory democracy at the grassroots level. That the Panchayati Raj institutions, the municipal governance institutions, we've passed the amendment, the constitutional amendment, but it's an unfinished business. A lot more work has to be done there. We need people to speak, not just at the time of elections, but beyond that, so that they can be part of the development future of India.
It's been wonderful talking to you. Great, insightful conversation. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Rajiv.
We hope you like this program. This program is also live streamed on All India Radio and aired on community radio stations. We look forward to your feedback on our WhatsApp number 9818120554. For participation in this program, write to us at sustainability.karma@gmail.com. You may also connect with us on social media. This podcast is also available on podcast hosting sites. Looking forward to meet you again at the same time next week with a new episode and a new guest. Till then, goodbye from all of us. Sustainability Karma, a podcast series with senior journalist and editor Rajiv Tikoo on sustainable development, sustainability and ESG.